Chapter 10. I felt my blood pressure rise, but in a good way. The exotic looking teenager standing in front of me was bold. She was yelling at Mr. Duke, and the tone of her voice demanded that the world listen as she stood up for her brother and for me. It was there, in the small, stuffy trailer on the edge of the baking hot blacktop of the Bakersfield School District parking lot, that I found an older girl who was disappointing only in her failure to speak the language of the mostly obliterated Kahula people. I found my Nyoing. Del Duke stared at us, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled the only rabbit he had out of a hat, which happened to be a cat from a cage. He gave us all a wobbly smile and opened the metal door of the plastic pet carrier. Then he said, "This is my cat, Cheddar. I thought you might like to meet him." So this was my surprise. I had said that my father was allergic to pet hair, which was why I couldn't have a dog or a cat or even a pygmy goat. This was Dell's attempt to please me, to bond. He brought in his cat. It was strange, but right then in that room, what wasn't? The cat took several, in what looked like slow motion, steps onto the desk. I knew that cats behaved in this casual way because they weren't needy. They didn't run and greet a person and slobber with joy. They didn't look for validation or recognition. They didn't fetch or cower or make big-eyed faces that say, "Love me, please." Their failure to care wasn't just appealing, but seductive, because cats made you try. We all watched as Cheddar sauntered across the desktop, rubbing his freakishly big body against the three shelves of the in and out box, where Del Duke had piled official-looking paperwork that I suddenly felt certain he later simply dumped unread in the large storage closet that was behind his desk. The huge cat then took a few sniffs and found the whole place not very satisfying. With no obvious provocation, he leapt down to the floor and bounced right out of the building like a bright-colored, fur-covered soccer ball. We watched as Cheddar hit the parking lot running, and in moments the fat cat had disappeared. For 37 straight minutes, we all looked under cars, behind hedges, and around the buildings of the school district administration headquarters for the missing hunk of Cheddar. But he was not to be found. Dell claimed that he felt bad about this, but oddly it seemed that Mai and I felt much worse. Finally, after agreeing to stop our search, we all returned to Dell's office to make lost cat flyers. Dell didn't have any photos of his cat, which also struck me as strange because from everything that I'd read, photographing a pet seemed to be where most animal owners found their greatest joy. But the problem was solved when Kwang Ha drew a perfect pencil sketch of Cheddar, which then served as the centerpiece of the Lost Cat Please Help Reward Offered flyer. Dell wouldn't list an exact reward amount. I believe that the economic incentive is crucial as a motivator, especially in a consumer-driven society. But I didn't argue the point. We gathered around the copying machine in the main office and watched together as the image was reproduced. It was here that I was able to identify a new sensation. I have never been part of a true group effort with older kids, and while we hadn't been successful in finding Del Duke's lost cat named Cheddar, I couldn't help but experience a kind of accomplishment as I stood next to 14-year-old Mai and her surly big brother. I was not pretending to be anyone but myself, and they still accepted me into their troop. I felt human. That was the only way I could describe it. Mr. Del Duke drove us home. He said that he had to take me first, and I assumed that this was because it would be inappropriate for him to be alone with a kid in his vehicle. Parents had to give permission for students to be off school grounds with anyone who works for the district. But I didn't want to raise any red flags, even though that was my signature color. For a moment, I drifted off into my head, but not with thoughts of something like cellular structure. I found myself imagining the place where Mai and Kwang Ha lived. Maybe it was a home with a chronically ill relative who was interested in regular examination by a young person who would listen endlessly to ailments and take precise notes. Or perhaps Mai's family had an apartment with a roof deck that housed an amateur self-constructed observatory with a shockingly powerful reflecting telescope. Sitting in the back seat, I wanted to exchange vital contact information with this older and intriguing girl named Mai. And a blink of pure fantasy, I suddenly saw myself walking away from Del Duke's grimy car with a tiny glass vial of her blood sample for genome sequencing. Because even though Mai said during the cat search that her mother came from Vietnam, I hadn't completely given up on the idea that she could have something to do with the Kahula tribe. This was one of my secrets. When I was younger, I imagined that I was an Indian princess. Looking out the car window to the street that I'd known my whole life, I understood that origins were so important, even if you didn't know your own. I was energized. Once I was home, I went into the kitchen and fixed myself a drink of hot water mixed with a tablespoon of honey from my backyard beehive, and a tablespoon of my own homemade vinegar, made from tart apples, brown sugar, and distilled water. As I sipped the tangy beverage, I was certain that the day, despite the loss of the counselor of Cat, had been a triumph. Having a friend, even one who was older and went to high school, would open a door for me into another world. That afternoon, I made a decision. I would learn everything possible about lost cats in Vietnam. It felt as if I were going up and over some kind of barrier after spending too long hitting the thing straight on.